My mother volunteered my time without asking. Again. I was standing in her kitchen on a Thursday evening, watching her smile at Aunt Patricia through the screen door, nodding like she'd just offered something of her own instead of something she'd stolen from me. "Aria will help with the garage sale next Saturday," she announced, her voice sweet and certain, the way it always sounded when she was giving away my life in pieces. "She's free all weekend. She'd love to help you organize and price everything." I wasn't free. I had plans to meet my college friend Vanessa, who was visiting from Seattle for the first time in 3 years. But Aunt Patricia was already beaming, already clasping her hands together in gratitude, already thanking me through the glass like I'd volunteered myself. My mother's hand was already waving dismissively when I opened my mouth to speak. Everyone nodded. Everyone smiled. Everyone except me. I stood there in that sunny kitchen with the smell of her lavender candles burning on the counter, feeling the familiar weight of obligation settle over my shoulders like a winter coat I never asked to wear. This was how it always went. My time wasn't mine to give or keep. My weekends weren't mine to plan. Even my voice seemed to belong to her whenever family was involved, swallowed up before I could use it to say the one word that mattered. No. I was 32 years old, and I still couldn't say no to my own mother without feeling like I was committing a crime against the entire family. I felt myself disappear. Not physically, of course. I still showed up to family dinners, still answered phone calls, still existed in the technical sense. But the person I was inside, the woman with dreams and preferences and a life of her own, had been slowly erased over the years until I was nothing more than a helpful shadow moving through other people's problems. My needs became background noise that nobody bothered to listen to anymore. My plans dissolved into nothing the moment someone else's crisis appeared, which was constantly, like clockwork, every single week. I worked as a graphic designer in Portland, freelancing from my small one-bedroom apartment downtown, and I genuinely loved my job when I actually had time to do it. The creative freedom it gave me, the flexible hours that should have been mine, the deep satisfaction of bringing someone's vision to life on screen. But every weekend, every holiday, every precious spare moment I managed to carve out for myself somehow ended up belonging to someone else in my sprawling, demanding family. My mother would call, her voice cheerful and light, already assuming my answer before she'd even finished asking the question, as if my agreement was a foregone conclusion that didn't require my actual participation. She smiled and said, "Family means sacrifice." We were sitting at her polished oak dining table after I'd spent 6 brutal hours cleaning out Aunt Patricia's garage in 90-degree heat. My back ached from lifting boxes of junk she'd hoarded for decades. My hands were filthy with dust and grime that wouldn't wash off easily. I'd missed Vanessa's birthday dinner because of this, the one chance I'd had to see her before she flew back to Seattle, and when I finally worked up the courage to mention it, my mother just tilted her head and gave me that look. The one that said I was being selfish for even thinking about myself when family needed me. "Family means sacrifice, Aria," she said gently, like she was teaching me something profound, some ancient wisdom I was too self-centered to understand on my own. "We help each other. That's what love looks like. That's what I taught you growing up." I wanted to ask her when she'd last sacrificed anything, when she'd last given up her weekend, her plans, her time for anyone except herself, when she'd last lifted a finger instead of just lifting her phone to call me. But I already knew the answer, sitting there in her air-conditioned dining room while she sipped her iced tea. She didn't sacrifice. She delegated. And I was her favorite delegate. My name is Aria. I'm 32 years old, a freelance graphic designer who once had big dreams about opening my own creative agency. And for most of my life, I was the family's go-to person for absolutely everything. Need someone reliable who won't let you down? Call Aria. Need someone who won't complain no matter how unreasonable the request? Call Aria. Need someone to drop everything and fix your problem right this second? You already know who to call. I was raised to believe that being helpful was the same as being loved, that saying yes was the price I had to pay for belonging to this family, that service equaled affection in some kind of twisted equation nobody ever explained to me. And I was always the offering, the one who showed up early and left late, the one who smiled through exhaustion and never asked for anything in return because asking felt like betrayal. The one who canceled her own plans without complaint because someone else's needs were always somehow more important than mine. My mother built her reputation as the generous one, the family glue, the woman everyone could count on in a crisis. What she really meant was that I was the one everyone could count on. She took all the credit while I did all the work. She got all the praise while I got all the exhaustion. I gave weekends. Every single one for the past 2 years without exception. It started small, the way these things always do. A Saturday here, a Sunday there, nothing that seemed too unreasonable at first. Helping my brother Kyle move into his new apartment across town. Babysitting my cousin Tessa's 3 kids so she could have a date night with her husband. Driving 3 hours to help my aunt set up for a retirement party she decided to throw at the last minute. Each favor felt reasonable on its own, manageable, the kind of thing good family members do for each other. But they never stopped. They piled up, one after another, like bricks being added to a wall that would eventually crush me, until my calendar looked like someone else's life entirely. I stopped making plans with friends because I knew they'd just get canceled anyway. I stopped dating because I never had time to actually go on dates or build anything real with anyone. I stopped doing the things that made me feel like myself, like painting or hiking or just sitting in a coffee shop with a good book, because there was always someone who needed me more urgently than I needed myself. My weekends became a blur of other people's errands, other people's problems, other people's lives taking precedence over mine. I gave money. Not huge amounts at first, nothing that would completely drain me overnight. $50 here for my brother Kyle's car repair that he swore was urgent. $100 there for my cousin's medical bill that insurance wouldn't cover. $200 for my uncle's temporary situation that somehow became permanent. My mother never asked directly, of course. That would have been too honest, too vulnerable. Instead, she'd just mentioned someone's struggle during our Sunday dinners. Her voice heavy with concern and weighted with expectation. And then she'd look at me with those eyes that knew exactly what they were doing. I wish I could help them, she'd say, knowing full well I'd offer, knowing I'd been trained my entire life to fix other people's problems. And I always did, like a puppet dancing on strings I couldn't see. Over the past 3 years, I'd given away nearly $12,000 to family members who promised to pay me back, but never did, never even mentioned it again. My savings account, which I'd carefully built for a down payment on my own place, had shrunk to almost nothing. Meanwhile, my mother still went on her annual cruise to the Caribbean and redecorated her living room twice. I gave silence. That was perhaps the worst part of all of it. I learned not to complain, not to question, not to point out the glaring unfairness of it all, because pointing it out made me the villain somehow. When my brother Kyle borrowed $2,000 for what he claimed was an emergency car repair, and then spent it on a brand new gaming setup that he showed off on social media, I said nothing. When my mother volunteered me to organize my cousin's entire wedding shower without even asking if I was available or interested, I said nothing. When I missed my best friend's engagement party, an event I'd been looking forward to for months, because my mother insisted I drive her to a doctor's appointment she could have easily rescheduled, I said nothing. Speaking up meant being labeled difficult, ungrateful, selfish. It meant guilt trips and cold shoulders that could last for weeks. It meant being told I'd changed, that I wasn't the sweet, accommodating girl they used to know and love. So I stayed quiet and let the resentment build inside me like pressure in a sealed container. Knowing eventually something had to give, I swallowed my anger, my hurt, my frustration, and I smiled through it all because that's what good daughters do, right? She called it love. Every single time I pushed back, every time I hesitated for even a moment before saying yes, my mother would give me that wounded look, that expression of deep disappointment and say, I raised you to be better than this. Better meant selfless to the point of self-destruction. Better meant available at all hours for all reasons. Better meant never, ever putting myself first under any circumstances. She called it love, this endless cycle of demands and obligations that left me hollow. She told everyone who would listen how proud she was of me, how generous and kind I was, what a wonderful daughter she'd raised. But she never mentioned that her generosity came from my wallet, my time, my life slowly being drained away. She took credit for my sacrifices and called it family values, called it the way things should be. And I let her, because I didn't know how to stop. I didn't know that love wasn't supposed to feel like drowning. I didn't know that family wasn't supposed to consume you until nothing was left. She'd trained me so well that I couldn't see the bars of the cage she'd built around my life, couldn't hear how wrong her words sounded, couldn't feel how much I'd lost. I called it survival, because that's what it felt like by the end, just barely keeping my head above water. I wasn't living a life. I was just trying desperately to keep everyone else happy so they wouldn't turn on me, so they wouldn't abandon me, so I wouldn't be alone. I worked late into the night to make up for all the hours I lost doing favors during the day. I ate fast food in my car at stoplights because I didn't have time to cook real meals or sit down like a normal person. I smiled through bone-deep exhaustion and pretended everything was perfectly fine, because admitting the truth felt like admitting I'd failed at the one thing I was supposed to be good at: being useful. My therapist, whom I'd started seeing 6 months earlier after a particularly bad anxiety attack, called it codependency. She used words like enmeshment and boundary violations that made me uncomfortable because they meant I had to acknowledge how broken everything really was. She said I was maintaining a system where everyone benefited except me. She asked me point blank what I actually got out of these relationships. I didn't have an answer. I sat there in her office with tears running down my face, and I couldn't name a single thing I'd gained from years of sacrifice. I stopped explaining. The breaking point came on a Tuesday afternoon in late September, sunny and beautiful outside while I was dying inside. My mother called while I was in the middle of an important client presentation, the kind that could lead to regular work and financial stability. I let it go to voicemail, but she called again immediately, and then again, and then a fourth time because emergencies in her world meant anything she wanted right now. When I finally excused myself awkwardly and answered with my heart pounding, she sounded annoyed, put out that I'd dared to make her wait. "Where have you been?" "I've been calling and calling." I told her I was working, trying to keep my voice level and professional. She dismissed it with a wave I could practically hear through the phone. "This will only take a minute. Your brother Kyle needs help moving some furniture this weekend. Saturday morning, 8 o'clock sharp. Don't be late like last time." She hung up before I could respond, before I could say I had plans, before I could even breathe. I stood in the hallway of the office building, phone still pressed to my ear, and something inside me finally cracked wide open. I was done explaining, done justifying, done asking for permission to live my own life. Something fundamental had shifted, and I knew I couldn't go back. I started choosing. That Saturday morning, I didn't show up at Kyle's apartment. I turned off my phone, made myself a proper breakfast for the first time in months, and went for a long, peaceful walk in the park near my building. The guilt was there, heavy and familiar like an old friend I'd known my whole life. But underneath it was something new and fragile and precious. Relief. Actual, genuine relief that felt like breathing after being underwater too long. My brother called 17 times according to the missed calls I saw later. My mother left 6 voicemails, her tone shifting from concerned to irritated to outright angry over the course of 2 hours. I listened to them that evening, sitting on my couch with a cup of tea I'd actually had time to enjoy, and I felt nothing but calm. The world hadn't ended like I'd always feared it would. My family was inconvenienced, yes, annoyed and frustrated and probably talking about me, but they'd survived. They'd figured it out. And for the first time in years, I'd chosen myself over their convenience. I'd chosen my own peace over their expectations. I'd chosen to exist as a person instead of as a tool. It felt terrifying and liberating in equal measure. Boundaries felt like betrayal. My mother showed up at my apartment the next day, Sunday morning, unannounced as always, her face tight with barely contained anger that made her look older somehow. "What happened to you?" she demanded, standing in my doorway like she had every right to be there, like my home wasn't actually mine. "Kyle was counting on you. He had to pay professional movers $200 because you didn't show up. $200 he doesn't have, Aria." I told her calmly that I'd had other plans, which was true even if those plans were just taking care of myself. She laughed, a sharp, bitter sound that cut through the air between us. "Other plans? Other plans? Arya, family comes first. Always. I raised you better than this. I took a deep breath and said the words I'd been practicing in my head all week, the script my therapist had helped me write. I can't keep dropping everything for family emergencies that aren't actually emergencies. I need to set some boundaries around my time. Her face went pale, then red, her expression shifting through shock and anger, and something that looked almost like fear. Boundaries? Is this what your therapist is teaching you? To abandon your family when they need you? I held them anyway. The next few weeks were absolutely brutal. Harder than I'd imagined. My mother called me selfish, ungrateful, cold, a disappointment. She told relatives I'd changed, that I wasn't the person I used to be, that therapy had poisoned my mind against the family. My brother Kyle stopped speaking to me entirely, blocking my number and unfriending me on social media. My aunt sent a long, rambling text message about how disappointed she was, how I'd let everyone down, but I held the line anyway. When my mother volunteered me for something without asking, I said no. When someone asked for money, I said I couldn't help right now. When guilt trips came my way through phone calls and messages, I let them bounce off without responding. It wasn't easy, not even close. Every single no felt like I was breaking something important and irreplaceable. Every time I set a boundary, I felt like I was being cruel, like I was hurting people I loved. But I kept going because the alternative was going back to a life that wasn't mine, back to drowning, back to disappearing. My therapist reminded me weekly that boundaries are healthy, that I had the right to my own life. Slowly, painfully, I started to believe her. She resisted. Hard. My mother tried absolutely everything she could think of to break me down. First came the guilt, delivered in long phone calls about how much she'd sacrificed for me growing up. How she'd given up her dreams of being a nurse to raise me. How she'd worked 2 jobs to keep me in nice clothes. How all she'd ever asked for in return was a little help when family needed it. When guilt didn't work the way it used to, she tried manipulation, getting more creative and calculated. She'd tell me about family members who needed help, her voice heavy with dramatic implication. I wish I had a daughter who cared about family the way I do. Some of us still believe in loyalty. When that failed to move me, she switched to outright anger. Cold silences that stretched for days. Passive-aggressive comments at family gatherings I still tried to attend. She even recruited my aunt to call and lecture me about respect and gratitude and knowing my place. But I didn't budge. I'd found something worth protecting, and that was myself. For the first time in my life, I was more afraid of losing myself than losing their approval. Y stayed firm. In October, she tested me again with what she thought would be the ultimate guilt trip. She called 2 days before Thanksgiving and told me she'd volunteered me to host the entire family dinner at my small apartment. 23 people, she said cheerfully. Cousins, aunts, uncles, everyone. When I said no, when I said absolutely not, she acted shocked and wounded. But everyone's expecting you to host. I already told them. They're so excited. How can you do this to me? I suggested calmly that she could host at her house, like she'd done for the past 15 years without complaint. She said she was too tired this year, that her back was bothering her, that it was time for me to step up and take over family responsibilities like an adult. I told her I'd be happy to bring a side dish to her house, but I wasn't hosting in my 1-bedroom apartment. She hung up on me without another word. She didn't call back for 2 whole weeks, the longest silence we'd ever had. Part of me waited for her to apologize. She never did. Distance taught her limits. December arrived cold and clear, and my mother finally started to realize I wasn't coming back to the old pattern, that this wasn't a phase I'd grow out of. I spent Christmas with friends instead of family for the first time in my entire life. I didn't send money when my cousin Tessa asked for help with rent, even though the request came with a sob story. I didn't volunteer to organize my aunt's birthday party or bake cookies for my uncle's retirement. For the first time in my adult life, I was genuinely unavailable, and I meant it. And somehow, miraculously, the world kept turning without me. My family figured things out on their own like functional adults. My brother hired professional movers and paid for them himself. My cousin found another way to cover her bills. My mother hosted her own events and survived the experience. They managed, just like I'd been managing my entire life while they took and took. And slowly, very slowly, the phone calls became less demanding and more careful. People started actually asking instead of assuming. They started saying please and thank you. Distance had taught them something I couldn't. That I was a person with limits. Guilt lost its power. In January, when the new year felt like a fresh start, my mother invited me to coffee. Just the two of us, she said carefully, no agenda, no ambush. I agreed, cautious but curious about what this meant. We sat in a quiet corner of her favorite cafe downtown. And for the first time in months, she didn't lecture me or criticize me, or tell me how I'd changed. She actually asked how I was doing. She asked about my work, and seemed to genuinely listen to my answer. She even apologized, though it was wrapped in layers of justifications and excuses. I didn't realize I was putting so much pressure on you, she said quietly, stirring her coffee. I just thought that's what families do. That's how I was raised. I told her gently that families support each other, but support shouldn't only flow in one direction forever. She didn't argue with me this time. She just looked tired and small and almost vulnerable, and I realized something profound sitting there. The guilt I'd carried for so long, the fear of disappointing her that had controlled my entire life, had finally lost its grip on me. I felt sad for her, but I didn't feel responsible for fixing her anymore. I reclaimed my time. By February, my life looked completely, almost unrecognizably different. I started running again in the mornings, something I'd loved before family obligations ate up every spare hour. I took a weekend trip to the coast with friends I hadn't seen in months, because I'd always been too busy. I signed up for a watercolor painting class I'd been wanting to try for years. I worked on passion projects, designing logos for causes I cared about instead of just doing client work. I went on actual dates with interesting people. I slept in on Saturdays without my phone buzzing constantly with demands and guilt. My calendar was mine again, actually mine. My money stayed in my account. My energy went toward building my own life instead of maintaining everyone else's. And it felt extraordinary in the simplest way. I hadn't realized just how much of myself I'd lost, how much I'd given away piece by piece, until I started getting it back and remembered what it felt like to be whole. My apartment felt different now. It wasn't just a place I crashed between family obligations. It was my home. She asked why I changed. In March, during another careful coffee meeting that had become our new normal, my mother finally asked the question she'd been circling around for months. What happened to you, Arya? You used to be so helpful, so generous with your time. Now you're... She trailed off, searching for a word that wouldn't sound too accusatory. I finished the sentence for her, no longer afraid of the truth. Now I'm what? Happy, healthy, actually living my own life instead of living yours. She flinched visibly, like I'd slapped her. I just don't understand when you became so selfish. When you started caring more about yourself than about family. I looked at her across the small table. This woman who raised me and taught me and shaped me, who taught me that love meant sacrifice but never explained that sacrifice should be mutual and reasonable. And I told her the truth, all of it, holding nothing back anymore. I said, I didn't change. I woke up. I explained everything. How I'd spent years giving everything I had to everyone else while my own life fell apart around me. How I'd drained my entire savings account to fund other people's emergencies that never seemed to end. How I'd missed weddings and birthdays and once-in-a-lifetime opportunities because I was always too busy being the family's unpaid servant. How exhausted I was, how empty I felt, from trying to earn love through constant service. How I'd started therapy because I was having panic attacks and couldn't sleep. How my therapist had asked me one simple question that changed everything. What do you want? And I'd realized I didn't even know anymore, because wanting things for myself had been trained out of me. I didn't change who I am fundamentally. I told her, my voice steady now. I just stopped pretending that being used was the same as being valued. I stopped accepting that love should hurt this much. She sat there completely silent, her coffee growing cold between her hands. For the first time in my entire life, I saw something in her face that looked almost like shame. Real, genuine shame. Silence followed. The conversation ended quietly that day. No yelling, no dramatic accusations, no dor slamming. Just silence, heavy and uncomfortable. My mother didn't call for several weeks after that conversation, and I didn't call her either. At first, I worried I'd broken something irreparable between us, that I'd pushed too hard with the truth. But then I realized that this silence was exactly what we both needed desperately. Space to think. Space to process what I'd said. Space to decide what kind of relationship we actually wanted to have moving forward, if any. During that long silence, I heard through my aunt that my mother had started going to therapy herself. I didn't ask for details or confirmation. That wasn't my business anymore, and I wasn't responsible for her healing journey. But it gave me hope, real hope, that maybe, just maybe, things could be genuinely different between us someday. That maybe she could learn what I'd learned. Respect arrived slowly. When my mother finally reached out again in late April, something fundamental had shifted in her. She asked politely if she could take me to dinner, actually asked instead of assuming. She showed up exactly on time, listened far more than she talked, and when the check came at the end, she paid without hesitation or complaint or expecting praise. "I've been thinking about what you said," she told me as we walked to our cars afterward. "And you were right about a lot of it. I took advantage of your kindness for years. I told myself it was just family helping family, but really, I was using you because it was convenient." It wasn't a perfect apology by any means. There were still justifications mixed in, still excuses, still some defensiveness. But it was a genuine start, more than I'd ever expected from her. And for the first time in years, I felt like she actually saw me as a complete person with my own needs and boundaries, not just as a resource to be deployed whenever problems arose. Her control no longer worked. The real test came in May when my brother Kyle announced he was getting married to his girlfriend of 2 years. My mother immediately started planning, slipping back into old patterns, and I could see her familiar habits emerging. She began assigning tasks to people without asking, making assumptions about who would do what, volunteering my time without checking with me first. But this time, when she tried to sign me up for extensive wedding planning duties, I asked one simple, direct question. "Did you check with me first before volunteering me?" She paused mid-sentence, genuinely caught off guard by being questioned. "Well, I just assumed you'd want to help your brother." I smiled and said gently but very firmly, "I'm happy to help with specific tasks if you ask me in advance, and I'm actually available. But I can't commit to an open-ended role as free wedding labor." She looked at me across her kitchen, and I could see her struggling with the old impulse to push back, to guilt me, to manipulate me into compliance. But she didn't do it. She caught herself. She just nodded slowly and said, "Okay, I'll ask you next time before making plans." Her control no longer worked because I no longer gave it power over me. My life finally belonged to me. By summer, the transformation was complete in ways I couldn't have imagined a year earlier. I wasn't just setting boundaries anymore. I was actively building a life I actually wanted to live every single day. I'd saved enough money to put a solid down payment on a small but beautiful condo in a neighborhood I loved. I'd taken on a major freelance project designing an entire brand identity for a nonprofit, work that excited me creatively and paid well. I'd started dating someone named Marcus who respected my time and didn't see my independence as a threat to our relationship. My relationships with family had stabilized into something healthier and more sustainable. We saw each other less frequently, but the time we actually spent together was better, more genuine. When I help someone now, it was because I chose to out of love, not because I felt obligated or guilty. And when I said no to something, people accepted it without drama. My mother and I would never have the close, warm relationship I once wished for as a child, but we had something more valuable now. Mutual respect and honesty. And that was enough for me. Family means sacrifice, just not mine anymore. I still think about my mother's favorite phrase sometimes when I'm setting a boundary or choosing myself. Family means sacrifice. She was right about that, in a certain way. Families do require sacrifice sometimes. Relationships take work and compromise. But sacrifice should be reciprocal, meaning everyone gives sometimes. It should be voluntary, not demanded or expected. And it should be sustainable over the long term, not soul-crushing. It shouldn't destroy the person doing the sacrificing until nothing remains. It shouldn't be demanded without gratitude or acknowledgement. And it definitely shouldn't flow in only one direction for years on end. These days, when my mother says those familiar words, I smile and respond with my own version that I've crafted carefully. Yes, family means sacrifice. But it also means respect, boundaries, and the freedom to build your own life alongside supporting others. She doesn't always agree with my version, and sometimes I can see her wanting to argue, but she listens now. She actually hears me, and that's more than I ever had before this journey. My time is mine now. My money is mine. My life is completely mine. Not because I stopped loving my family or caring about them, but because I finally learned to love myself enough to stop disappearing into their needs and expectations. And that, I've learned, is the only kind of sacrifice that actually matters.